Hello and welcome to a little chat about the movie Soul, which we've all just recently seen. Pippa Evans, Mark Vernon, and myself, Jonathan Rowson. I'm director of Perspectiva, and our theory of change involves cultural forms. We're quite interested in what's happening at the kind of macroscopic semiosphere of meaning and purpose and ideas about what human life is for. We see that as a kind of key active ingredient in dealing with some of the intractable collective action problems of our time. So we don't see it as irrelevant what people think of a movie in Hollywood. We see it very much as feeding into the culture, which feeds into the society, which feeds into policy, which feeds into practice, which feeds into our daily lives. But to zoom back out to the movie, Soul was recently released by Disney, and I'll let our guests speak about that a little bit more. Friends, really, rather than guests, but let's just pretend for now. So I'm going to start. The reason I got into this is that Mark Vernon one day sent me a message saying, "This is an amazing film. I'd really recommend it." And actually, no, sorry, it was Pippa, wasn't it? Pippa said, "This is a great movie. You should really see this." Then Mark not only saw it, but wrote a long piece on Medium about it, saying just how deep and amazing it was. And then I watched it myself. So we're going to just explore a little bit more about why we thought it was quite so interesting. So if we can start with you, Mark, tell us a little bit more about. Actually, no, I'm going to go to Pippa. My instinct is Pippa. You can just tell us what made you want to share it with us. What made you feel that this was something that we all ought to watch?
Well, I suppose. Well, I mean, I watched it just off on a whim, as it were. Something to do in lockdown, and it just it was such a powerful film. Considering, I mean, Pixar is amazing anyway. I remember watching Inside Out in a cinema with my husband, and both of us in tears, whereas all the children around us were just wandering around, going, "I'm not sure what this is about." So it felt like a film for grown-ups to sort of question their own internal process. Um, and then to watch Soul, it really felt like it was speaking to this moment, actually, where we are all, and of course we're in the UK, we're in lockdown right now, and I think it came out when we were in another lockdown, where perhaps people are themselves feeling like they're at this place where they literally can't do their spark, they can't do what they thought was their purpose. So we're all, in a sense, in a place where we're questioning that purpose. And here comes this film that sort of asks us to explore what we mean by our purpose. And everybody I spoke to, and actually when I searched on Twitter, lots of people said this film made me feel better about myself, about the questions I have about life. Why do I feel like this? Why do I feel like it's pointless? And of course, the extra additional thing for me was there's a whole theme about improvisation in there, which is my forte. And the moment where Joe is playing the piano, improvising, looking at the things that Joe, when inhabited by a cat, and I know that if you haven't seen it, that this will sound like a strange sentence, but when Joe's inhabited by the soul 22, they pick up all these little things. The lollipop brings them joy, and the bagel, and a sweet wrapper, and suddenly Joe connects with something other than just doing. He connects with being, and I think that's why went, Jonathan, Mark, this is it. Let's watch this film and talk about it, please.
Okay, good. Thank you. And also I really enjoyed it, and also I always enjoy the enthusiasm of others who tell me that you must watch this. I watch it more eagerly for that. Um, Mark, I'm quite fine with spoilers for what it's worth. I think we just tell people, look, there will be some spoilers here. I think it's the kind of movie where we can't really discuss the meaning of it without giving something away. That's my reading of it anyway. But Mark, do you want to just run us through briefly the plot, insofar as it's there, and then tell us what caught your eye about it, what caught your imagination about it?
Yeah, well, actually, I could say why I loved it, sort of thematically almost, because I think one of the genius things about Pixar is that they understand that, in a way, the image, the story communicates the heart of it much more than just saying what it's about. So for like Inside Out, is as a psychotherapist, I'm a psychotherapist. It's a brilliant portrayal of what's called object relations theory. And immediately you can feel how horrible that phrase is to describe inner life. And yet the minute you see the film, you get it. We're full of these kind of sub-personalities and these different moments. And, sometimes one's in charge, sometimes another. And to have that portrayed to you in the story, you just get it. And that's the genius, I think, too, of Soul as well. I mean, I'd flagged it up because I saw that it was coming out, and I'm very interested in how the notion of soul is portrayed in our culture, partly because, you know, it so often goes down debates about, is the soul eternal or not? Is it separate from the body or not? All this kind of stuff. And immediately you know that you're never going to decide, because you get lost in these sort of byways, go down the rabbit hole, as it said. And so I was really interested in what they would do, and was delighted not to be disappointed. I mean, in some ways, yeah, well, one of the things I liked about the plot was how it actually did away with a lot of stuff, first of all. It did away with the idea you've got to put 10,000 hours into life in order to get it. It did away with the idea that you've got to be in a flow state in order to get it. It did away with the idea that you've got to have a peak experience. It even actually, in a funny sort of way, did away with the idea you've got to have a near-death experience, although that's how the movie begins, when Joe is about to have his big moment, falls down a manhole, and half dies, so much so that he has this NDE. In the end, you know, that turns out to have been a huge kind of digression, you know, necessary for the plot, and in a way it precipitated his deeper insight. But he could have had the deeper insight, as Pippa said, just looking at the sweet wrapper on the street. But what, to cut to the chase, I think what the heart of it is for me was that he realized that, yeah, you know, it's his being that counts. And that all the effort to try and find that in doing stuff is a distraction. To put it a bit more abstractly, with the philosopher's hat on, I think it got to the heart of not so much what our culture does or doesn't make of the afterlife, the essence of what it is to be human, all that, but how it's made this massive switch, trusting that what's objective is true, what's kind of out there, what's got to be reached, what's got to be striven for, what's got to be proved, what's got to be evidenced, all that, as if that is the standard for truth. When actually the standard for truth is what you know directly yourself. It's subjectivity that counts. This was always the assumption until the modern world. And the flip, I think, causes us all sorts of problems. So knowing life within yourself, within your very being, is the crucial thing, which Joe, you know, comes to through all the ups and downs of the plot. Now, there's a lot more can be said about that. But that was the heart of it for me. So it completely delivered, and I was delighted.
So as I understand it, I'm going to run through the sequence just to sort of get our solid ground, because I would like to explore what you just said in more detail. But you have a jazz musician who is teaching in what, high school, I guess, or elementary school maybe, and he has moments of that where he enjoys, but mostly he feels he's missed the boat and he really ought to be a bona fide jazz musician. There's someone he particularly admires. He gets a kind of lucky break through his friend. He makes the chance to somehow work with her. He even gets help from his mum to look good for that. It works out. But then, just as he thinks his life's about to take off, he kind of, well, disappears. And he disappears into this liminal space of life and death. And in that place, he learns a great deal about the whole cosmic fabric of what human life is for. And it seems there's a bit of misunderstanding even in the heavens among, you know, souls about what they're meant to be doing when they're here. And the film delivers something different because it's a bit counterintuitive or unexpected what happens towards the end. You know, we imagine he'll get back to life and fulfill his dream and become this great jazz musician and a household name around the world. You know, like be the new Miles Davis or whatever. But actually, something very different happens. He reconnects with his closest relationships. He realizes how blessed he is. He enjoys the sort of sensations of the wind on his face. There's an acorn that features, I think, quite prominently. And there's a sense in which waking up. Sorry, go ahead.
So I was just gonna question the fact that that doesn't happen, because actually we don't see what happens. All we see is he recognizes his memories, these moments. He says, actually, these are the moments that were precious, actually. But we don't see what happens. There's not actually a sense that he doesn't become a famous jazz
Right,
musician,
right.
but rather that he stops being a lost soul,
Right.
and that he finds himself. And I think that speaks to why the mentors at the beginning, because when I was watching, I was going, well, it's interesting, isn't it? The mentors at the beginning are all these famous people. They're all Gandhi, and yeah. So actually, I would suggest that he does become a famous jazz musician, but that is not the point of the film. The point is that we must be connected, for any of this to mean anything.
Okay, so your reading of it is that he may well achieve his dreams anyway.
Yeah.
But that's almost incidental. That's
Yes.
like not the heart of the matter.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, paradoxically, you may be more likely to do that if you let go of it and enjoy life more fully in some way. Yes.
Careful, don't instrumentalize it.
Yeah,
that's the terrible thing about enlightenment.
Right.
If I get it, I'll have it all.
Right. But there is a tension there, right? Because it's the same way as I remember when I was playing chess competitively. There was a lot of sports psychology and stuff out there saying, just focus on the love of the game and playing every move well and let the results take care of themselves. And, that's not unusual. And do you instrumentalize that? Well, no, there is a sense in which you can get into a state where you really do care only about the process and not the outcome. But nonetheless, it is true that if you manage to achieve that state of mind, the outcomes are often better. But if you do it for that reason, it doesn't work. So there's all these kind of layers of contradiction and paradox in there. Soul, I want to come back. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, just a bit more. So I think one of the things, as I was sort of watching it, it really is. There's nothing to get. There's absolutely nothing to get, and that is in a way the heart of the film for me. And that's why instrumentalizing it is such a distraction, because it actually takes you away from this awakening, this enlightenment, and this realization. Well, really, this remembering. I think I like the Platonic word, remembering who you are, by asking, really, who am I? And I think he did. But that said, there is a bit of a path. So I think this is the significance of him remembering the love of his mother and his friends. That their kindness isn't just nice to him as a separate soul, but it starts to make him feel that maybe there's a kind of link between these souls. Maybe there's one soul, as it were, one consciousness that the kindness helps him to wake up to. I mean, my sense is that music does that as well. Music is this extraordinary thing, really, that bridges its acoustic vibrations on the air at one level, and yet we hear melody, we hear harmony, and then we, of course, in a way, hear even more than the melody and the harmony. We hear the meaning, and it has this universal quality. So I think these things start to, as it were, turn him around, so that then when he has the moment that's suddenly all the other stuff falls away, and he's ready to see, say, the sycamore falling from the sky, and to realize that his being is shared with that being, and that remembrance of who he is the thing that then makes it not matter kind of what happens next, though he may well become famous and so on.
I wonder, with my writer's hat on as well, I wonder if there was a version that they wrote with the ending. I can imagine there being an ending where he's an old man with his grandchild, echoing the image of him with his father, and saying, but it was all about you, the sort of slightly more cheesy Disney-esque kind of ending. And also there's a mention of a woman when Soul 22 is in his brain, is in his body. He says, who's Lizzie, or who's Lisa, or something like that. And he says, no, nobody. And you think, oh, maybe that's going to be the story we follow. But Pixar really cuts back on all of these sort of extraneous things that will be achieved if we are enlightened, as you say, Mark. So I would be intrigued to know if they decided that they recognised that there was a danger of them saying that. So they cut those strips, or if they put them in for us to go, oh, I know where this story is going, and then to not deliver what we were expecting.
I really like to think so, because I really hope that the writers haven't just stumbled several times across, what feels to me like moments of genius. That they've really got the genius to be able to put these abstract ideas into a film, and all that takes. So I hope that's true.
So you're saying, Mark, and this is going to sound like I'm doing the same old thing, but you're saying that the thing to really get about this movie is that there's nothing to get. In other
Yeah.
words, and just to sit with that for a second. So that's the sort of main take home. Absorb and enjoy and learn from, if that's not too instrumental, this movie as a view about life that says it's already there. Like there's nothing to be done or achieved, but to be fully where you are. I guess I want to just push that slightly in the sense of how resilient do we feel that is, because he does come to and he sort of looks up, and the film ends in a way that we're left in no doubt that he's somehow transformed. But I also know that the next day he wakes up, and then the next day there's some new issue, like his shower doesn't work, and the next day he falls out with his friend, and then he doesn't get the gig he thought he'd get or whatever, and life trickles on. Is that attitude and that transformation of heart and mind resilient, or do you feel it's quite fragile?
Well, to answer your question, I mean, the other thing that was going on for me actually while I was watching this film was I have begun to listen quite intently to the teaching of a chap called Rupert Spira, who is, I think, a brilliant teacher of Advaita Vedanta, this idea that of non-dualism, that whilst we feel we have a separate self, that is just a kind of limitation of awareness which is shared by us all. And I particularly enjoyed Rupert Spira for his clarity, but he's helped me to understand something which I have tried to get within the Christian tradition, which is the one I'm more directly familiar with. And in the Christian tradition, the way of Christian mysticism, at least, which is not what you normally come across in Christianity, in my view, there's the awakening to the fact that when you can say, I am, you can only really say that with full confidence because you realize that it rests in the I amness of the divine, the oneness of the divine. And so I think this is why in a lot of discussions about identity now, people run around in all sorts of directions because they're trying to locate this identity at the wrong level. So they might look to some kind of philosophical proof about I-ness and they see it doesn't stack up. They might do some sort of skeptical experiential take, a bit like David Hume does, and watch their transient thoughts and then think, well, it's just transient thoughts, there's nothing robust in it. In the culture wars, people look to absolutely securely fix their identity on, say, their gender or on their sexuality, and then it gets confusing and complicated because it's not quite so robust as people thought. But returning to this more spiritual, mystical, I think it's just a kind of it's the inwardness again. It's the subjectivity, and really trying to peel back until you get to, as Rupert Spira would put it, this awareness of being aware, that you then realize it's not actually just your own isolated experience. How could it be? Because at first you feel it in others when you're feeling it in yourself, and maybe shared musical experiences, shared feelings of love, shared feelings of beauty, that's what they are at their most profound. That's certainly, in the Platonic tradition, which is very influential in the Christian tradition, that's how they describe what feelings of beauty or understanding are. The reason why they have this wonderful quality is because you realize you're connected in those moments. When you understand something together, you feel this oneness upon which our identity rests. When you share a beautiful experience, you realize this oneness upon which it rests, and so on. Now I can't remember quite where I started with all that, but anyway,
that's more than enough.
You
acquitted yourself admirably there, Mark. So no worries. Pippa, I'm keen to sort of just, unless you're the direct follow up from that, one of the things I wanted to understand from you is because you mentioned already that with your improviser's hat on and your writer's hat on, and there was a sense in which you're in show business, and in that sense, the desire for the audience's acclaim and the desire for stardom and making it and being big and famous maybe looms in your psyche more than most. And I just wondered, how did the film speak to that, if at all? Was there a sense in which you felt it resonated with what you've gone through, or is that too much?
Well, two things. First, I will speak directly to what Mark said, just because he has made me a Rupert Spira fan as well. But what I loved, so I felt the moment where the sycamore, the helicopter from the sycamore tree in the hand, that was literally being aware of being aware in that moment. And the reason that spoke to us is because we all secretly know, we all know it inside. So we were, in that moment, I felt myself release something of, yeah, that's it. That it's just, we just want to connect with that tree. And then I was interested as to why they chose a sycamore tree. And apparently it's one of the oldest trees. And it symbolizes strength, protection, eternity, and divinity. So there you go. So it was, I wondered, did they choose the sycamore on purpose for that? But to respond to your question, Jonathan, yeah, absolutely, and I've been very successful in many ways in my career, and played lots of the big places and been on the telly, and most times when I arrived at the place where people said, "You've arrived," or "This is it, you've made it now," I would think. And I'd have exactly that feeling Joe has outside the jazz club, where he says, "I thought I'd feel differently." And it's almost, this having hung the hopes on the final point rather than being in the moment with what is occurring, meant I was never really enjoying, I was never in the moment. I was always looking to the next thing, which is why I love how Dorothea Williams responds, where she says, tonight was a great show, and that's rare, rare. And tomorrow we'll do it all again. So again, it was a moment where the film isn't saying, don't try and be a famous musician. It's saying, be with the place you're in, be with the show you're in, the moment. And now, and so now I'm obviously in Showstopper, the improvised musical, which is an improvised musical with 10 people trying to create a musical moment. And the music is so powerful. And again, we've improvised over 1,200 musicals now, and we could probably list 15 that broke our hearts because they were so beautiful and that we felt so connected in those moments. And that's why we keep doing it. It's because we're waiting for those next ones, just like Dorothea. I've definitely recognised that. And I think, as I said at the beginning, a lot of people in lockdown, particularly performers, because we literally can't get on a stage, will have questioned why we want to be on a stage.
Because that's profound, and what struck me about that moment, I noticed Mark was also nodding, is I remember that there was something very intense about that particular moment where they emerge from the evening's music, and he asked her, I think the exact question I think is, so what happens next, or what happens now? And she looks at him and then she tells a story about, she does a little folk story about the fish in water, right? The kind of
this is the ocean. This is the ocean.
Right. Tell me how that goes again. I've forgotten the exact.
A young fish asks an older fish, "I'm looking for the ocean," and the older fish says, "This is it. We're in it. This is the ocean." And he says, "No, this is water." I think he says,
Right.
"I'm looking for the ocean."
Right.
Yeah.
And
the other reason why I really like the Dorothea Williams character is she's quite fierce. And there's a real freedom, I think, in being absolutely clear what you're doing, which she has. She's quite harsh to Joe in a way, but then when she sees that he has this ability, and that I think in particular that he can collaborate with them in the band and all those kind of really important things, that's another way of saying the same thing, because he can give the moment to the moment, if you like, and then she tells him in a way not to cling to it, to use slightly religious language. And that's for me, that was the kind of the extra piece which she gives him on the doorstep at the end of the gig. She realizes that he could throw himself into the moment and be with them all, in that kind of generosity of spirit, and then just needed that extra thing of, and now let it fly and go home. Because that too is the kind of generosity of being which she has, I think.
And that is the tension that most of us are dealing with, isn't it? That we want to give something our full attention, but if we give too much, then we might spoil it, or if we become too relaxed about it, then we also might. So we have to constantly be in this relationship with it, rather than thinking of it as one or the other. This is how I behave. It's like, no, just be with it and be responding constantly, like a fish in the water.
Yeah. The sycamore moment is so wonderful, and I didn't realise that about the tree. That's really lovely to hear. And the element which I really loved was the way that the sycamore falls with the sun against the background. And I think that's a brilliant way of portraying, you know, what the enlightened tell us, not just about this awareness of being aware, but how when you then, as it were, return to life with that sense, life starts to shine with that kind of, the being, as it were, outshines the doing. So that's, I think, why the doing, whatever happens, fame or not, in a way is the secondary issue, because you stay with the shining of the being. And so the way that the sun was radiating the moment where Joe sees the sycamore was a very wonderful way of portraying that, I think. And the sun, you know, is a very common and powerful metaphor for that reason of radiance, luminosity, awakening.
And I wondered actually, because actually that struck me at the end when he says, "I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, but I'm going to live it." That he's again in the sun, and I wondered what would this film be like if they replaced all of the scenes with the sun with the rain, yet had the same sentiment. Like how much? Because for me, that's another thing, is to continue with that sentiment of being, but even when it's raining and snowing and hailing. That was just. I'm pretty sure the reason they don't have those scenes is because they're really hard to render. But I would be intrigued to know what that film would be like if it was constantly in rain and thunder.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely saying, let go of the positive experiences. You know, it's quite easy to want to let go of the negative experiences, but to want to let go of the peaks and all that is something else, to discover something beneath. But to flip it around completely would be fascinating. I mean, maybe sometimes you see that in films which are about tragedy and loss, and you know, after all the heartache and the ups and downs, something kind of still remains, which is the value of the relationship, if that's what it was about. But then is a kind of reflection of the value of being itself. Pixar's Soul is a comedy rather than a tragedy. But I'm just trying to think of another example. But anyway.
Well, I did wonder a comparison film would be Mr. Holland's Opus, which I don't know if you remember, with Richard Dreyfuss, and he's a high school band teacher, so it's a bit literally the same. And he thinks he's going to write this opus, and he's going to become a famous conductor, musician, writer. And of course, spoiler alert, it never happens. But at the end, all of his students that he's ever taught put his opus on for him as an old man. And it's really beautiful because, you know, it represents that actually you were doing the work, it was happening, and what you did was of value. But that would be an interesting comparison, because it takes him his whole life to get to the point where he might accept that he didn't waste his time.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that was another, just in a way, almost my final thought, I think, on the film, it is set against this backdrop of eternity, you know, in the great before, when the souls are coming to earth. And I quite liked it that even in the great before, it wasn't really quite clear what life's about. It really is in this life that you discover what life is about. Again, you can't sort of be told and then not have to do it, as Soul 22 tries to you know, bring off. But that's wonderful, because, you know, in the Buddhist terms, it would be saying that samsara is nirvana, that it is on the wheel of life, that the heart of life is discovered, the true nature of life is discovered, and so it was a, you know, very beautifully, very lightly, it was very powerfully saying, look, this is what life is about, you know, nothing less. That's what you call a high concept movie. It was really brilliant.
So, I mean, there's a lot to say, but I mean, I was touched by it, and I saw fully, after you both recommended it, why this was an unusual and a sort of subtle and well-delivered experience for the audience. I do wonder to what extent the millions watching it will see what you saw, and how much that matters, because a lot of what I was watching it with Vishnu and Kailash, who are 5 and 11, and my wife Shiva, and they kind of liked it, but they didn't have the backdrop of this deep philosophical insight that you suggested was in there. And I think what they saw was a lot of pyrotechnics about little souls and these Jerry characters who can move in multiple dimensions, and you know, elaborate sort of animations. And I just wonder, that underlying message being so profound and so sort of somehow central. Do you feel the enthusiasm around the movie? I think we know it's been very well reviewed. I think it's 96% on Tomatometer, and Wikipedia at least tells us that it's been well reviewed. And Wikipedia is never wrong, of course. But I mean, it's there's good reason to believe people liked it. But I just wonder if they like it because they see the depth that you see, or maybe they feel it without being able to articulate it. Or how would you understand that?
I suppose my question would be: do you have to be able to articulate it?
No. You could love it and not know why you love it. But I'm curious to know.
But I wonder if actually, if you don't have, obviously I can WhatsApp Mark and say, Mark, I think this is quite interesting, and then he can talk to me in deep context. But to just have that sense of I'm doing okay, or I need to pay more attention. If that was your takeaway from that film, I think I need to pay more attention. That's a very powerful takeaway without being able to write an academic essay. I would suggest a lot of people felt it,
right,
but might not be able to articulate it in an academic sense.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, and in a way, why Pixar's so exceptional is that it's an entertainment format, but it's not ultimately about sentimentality. As a lot of that kind of entertainment might be, it is quite serious. And the other thing I'm sure can happen is that people go off on the details. So when I was looking around at responses, sure enough, there was a relatively conservative Christian newspaper that had written an article about how this was Mormonism creeping into the culture, because apparently in Mormonism there's the notion of the great before, and in Christianity various figures have toyed with that idea, like Oregon, but they were declared heretics and things. So you can get lost in the portrayal of the Jerrys. Are they angels or are they something else? And who is Moonwind? The guy on the galleon who I absolutely loved. He seems to me like a kind of a wise sort of spirit guide. Making comments about how actually flow and addiction are pretty similar. You can't really tell them apart. So you can enjoy all those details too, of course, as well. But they can become distractions.
And look, last thought, because I know we've spoken about it, but just briefly, did it help us understand what the soul is? Do you feel like we can feel a bit more clearly what the soul, when we say soul, what we actually mean because of this movie? Pippa, you go first.
Yeah, but I would refer to my earlier response, which is I couldn't necessarily articulate to you what that is, but I can feel it for sure.
Yeah, and I felt it chimed with, actually soul is a kind of felt experience of life. That's the heart of it. Again, the risk is objectifying it, as if it's something I've got to somehow find. That is the distraction, which is the mistake in my view.
Great. Well, we could talk further, but I think we'll leave people to either watch the movie or do something else. But thanks for joining, and it's been a pleasure. And may soul be with you today and every day. And I will see you soon